Thank you so much, Glenn, for the opportunity to share my experience, strength, and hope. I am sober by the grace of God and the fellowship of AA. I've got a home group and a sponsor, and my name is Billy D. I am always honored and privileged when asked to serve in Alcoholics Anonymous. Tony told me years ago, he said, Billy, if you don't put your hand out and if you don't give something back to this fellowship, no one will ever remember your name. And at that point in my life, the reputation that I had built for myself was such that I didn't want anybody to know who I was. And I camouflaged the real me. I was afraid. I was afraid of allowing myself to be seen and understood. But through this fellowship, my life has changed beyond my wildest dreams. I bought into the fact that there's only one requirement for Alcoholics Anonymous, and that's a desire to stop drinking. The day was December 5th, 1989. And when I woke that morning, after coming out of another blackout, I realized then and there, as I looked at myself in the mirror, that I had crossed the line. It was something I knew between my God and I. And that day and that time, I was only like 35 years old. So there were no tragedies in my life. Everybody was doing well. There were families. I had cousins and aunts and uncles and events and affairs. And so it was a pretty large family, personal family. My household, there were no drunks. I was the only drunk in my household. You know what that was like. Drinking and then not being able to not drink and then not being able to not control my drinking. And that morning, when I looked in the mirror, December 5th of 1989, I looked over at the digital clock. And at that time, they were kind of new. And it said 7:35, so I remember exactly when it was. And I looked in the mirror and I realized I had just come out of another blackout. And I thought to myself, this ain't working. Because I took a drink on November 2nd of that year, and then the drink took a drink, and then the drink took me. And at that point, I realized that I came to the conclusion that it was my wife and children that were the problem. So the best way to get sober was to get rid of the problem. And since they weren't going anywhere, I figured I'd go. And at the time, it seemed like a perfectly rational idea. I walked off and left my wife and kids. How about that? And then I realized after I got sober that it's the first drink that I have to stay away from. Because for this alcoholic, after I've taken the first drink, I will do anything for the second one. I've been there. I've done it. I don't need to be convinced any longer. So on December 5th, after I realized that everything was gone, and it wasn't them, it was me. I was the problem. I came to the reality that you really blew it. You had everything. I had a home. I had a job. I had an automobile. I was building a life that normal people do when they graduate from school and they take on a family and they take on the responsibility. I couldn't handle the responsibility, man. I couldn't hack it. I used to throw bills and telephone bill, electric bill on the table, wouldn't even open it, like it was going to go away. So needless to say, I could no longer hide those indiscretions, and they became, the reality. And so I didn't want to answer the phone. Everybody was after me. So as I'm sitting there and I'm looking in the mirror, I started to weep. I didn't boo-hoo. I just started to weep. My eyes welled up with water because I was looking at this pitiful sight of a human being, a man who had totally destroyed his life. And I said to myself, this ain't working. And I got to do something. And it was at that moment that tears ran out of both my eyes. And it was something that has never happened since. And I had only seen it before in cartoons, where the tears roll down your cheek on both sides and they meet at the bottom of your chin and then they drop. So when that happened, I chuckled, didn't laugh. I just chuckled. I said, look at this. You know, you're losing your mind, because I was laughing and I was crying at the same time. And I didn't know what to do at this point. I didn't know what was next. But I did say, if I drink again, 7:35 in the morning, I got till 12 o'clock to make a decision. If the decision at noontime is to pick up a drink, I will die an alcoholic mad dog death. Convinced. They call it, I forget what they call it. It's on the tip of my tongue. You know what they call it. And for whatever reason, when I thought that, I heard a voice, and I'm a man of great faith. I need to drop that off. I heard the voice of Satan speaking to my ear, and he spoke as clearly to me that morning as I'm speaking to you now. I never forgot it. He said, I took your wife and your kids. I took your home and your job. Everything that belonged to you now belongs to me. And I want you dead, but I'll settle for you drunk. And I asked God, you've got to do something, because I'm losing my mind. And I don't even know how I got the number. I don't know how I got there. It was a 10 o'clock meeting. And I got to that 10 o'clock meeting. Now, mind you, when the drink took me, I was in Detroit, Michigan that day. And when I came out of the blackout, I was in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. And I looked at the ticket, and the ticket said that I had gotten off the plane in Cincinnati, Ohio, and walked through the airport and boarded another flight. I have no recall. I have no knowledge of any of that. So when it said, when the enemy said that he took it all and he wants me dead, but he'll settle for me drunk, I knew I couldn't do it another day. If I did, incomprehensible demoralization. That was the phrase that I was looking for. I had never heard that before until I came to Alcoholics Anonymous, and someone said incomprehensible demoralization, and I said, that's me. You're talking about me. So there was no need for me to try to fake it or cover it up. I knew what had happened, and it was incomparable, and I was demoralized beyond comprehension. But God, of my understanding, brought me to the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. Now, that wasn't the first time I said I was going to stop. Of course not. You know, and as I said it, I had everything at 35 years old. Life was good, big family. And in the last 33 years, virtually everybody's gone. My mother's gone, my father's gone, my aunts are gone, my uncles are gone, many of my cousins are gone, my son is gone. So I didn't know what tragedy was. I didn't know what Tony meant when he said, Billy, acceptance does not mean approval. And the day will come when you will have to accept the unacceptable. And it has arrived more than once in 33 years. I've learned that this too shall pass. Tony told me that when I was having a bad time. And then when the bad time was over, I said, Tony, I'm feeling better. And Tony says, this too shall pass. These were the things that I come from old school, man. These cats down here that were here when I got here, they were legendary in my mind. There was a man named John Mullen, and he would walk across the room to get a cup of coffee. And just his movement just was drenched with serenity. I wanted what he had. And when John Mullen would share at a meeting, I would sit on the edge of my seat because I didn't want to miss a word. Mind you, I got nothing. I got nothing. And they tell me to keep coming back, Billy, keep coming back. It gets better. I don't know what it is. I'm defeated. So the meeting, I picked up a white chip, and that was the beginning of the journey. And needless to say that I was sober on December 5th. On December 6th, I wanted to drink bad because I had not drawn a sober breath in 3 years. So I'm sitting in the coffee area of the meeting. It was a clubhouse. And a guy walks in, and it's Tony. And I must have looked the part. And he said, "How you feeling today, kid?" Back then I was the kid. And so Tony says, "How you feeling?" I said, "Man, I want to drink, man. I really want to drink." And Tony says to me, words that I'll never forget. These are things strangers spoken in my sobriety, cat, that made a difference in my life. And Tony says to me, when I tell him that I want to drink, and he says, "You have what all the Donald Trumps on Park Avenue would give millions of dollars for." I don't even know this guy. Where did he come from? And secondly, what is this a game? Why would you ask me that? Or why would you even say that? So I say to him, "What does that mean? I'm arrogant. I'm angry. What are you talking about?" Tony says to me, "You've got 24 hours sobriety." And it blew my mind. It was the first time in 3 years I had not had a drink in 24 hours. And I would have given $1 million for it. That's what it felt like. I would have given $1 million for the feeling that I had. And then when he told me what I had, the feeling, the obsession to drink, it was gone. And I stayed sober on that statement for 2 weeks. 2 weeks. That's all I kept telling myself. I got 24 hours. I got 24 hours. I got another 24 hours. And it was adding up. And about 2 weeks later, it stopped adding up. It stopped making a difference. And I'm like, so what's the point? So you got another day. How long is this going on? I'm sitting at a 10 o'clock nighttime meeting, and the speaker is speaking. And his name was Ed. And he had long sobriety when I got here. So Ed said, and I'm sitting in the back of the room, and I'm sitting down with my head in my hands, and I'm wondering, what is the world is going on with your life, man? Your wife and kids are gone. You got no job. What are you doing? They keep telling you it's going to get better. Don't leave before the miracle happens. And I'm not buying none of this. But then Ed says this, and that's the only thing I remember him saying that night at the meeting. He says, "Religion is for the man who is afraid to go to hell, and spirituality is for the man who has already been." And I was moved beyond comprehension. I said, that's it. That's it. It's a spiritual thing. Because when I was trying to do it religiously, it wasn't working. I tried the whole religious thing and it just didn't work. I kept drinking. But when he told me that it was spiritual, there was hope. There was hope when he said that. And I stayed sober off of that for many 24 hours. People were saying things that I was picking up in the rooms that I was staying sober on what they said. And I was the newcomer. So when I looked around the rooms, there were plenty of people in the rooms who were my age today. And I'm thinking to myself, because I'm just undrunk. I'm not sober yet. I'm just undrunk. And I'm thinking to myself, maybe I got here a little too soon because all these people are old. And I may have some drinking left to do. It never occurred to me that they kept coming back. They're gone now. And these were the cats that held me up, the John Mullins, the Tony, my sponsor, Tony, the man that I had a relationship with that lasted for 30 years. Tony loved me like no one else ever loved me. And he wanted for me what I didn't know I wanted for myself. And I walked with Tony for 30 years. Tony 12-stepped me on his deathbed. still sober. John Mullen did the same thing. He 12-stepped me at a big book meeting, convention out in Weston. Carol knows where Weston is. And I went to the big book meeting and I bumped into John's Mullen with the Serenity. And the word had gotten back that he had brain cancer and he was dying of brain cancer. So I didn't see him, hadn't seen him. And then I bumped into him at the big book meeting and he was sober. And I'm just undrunk. So I'm figuring if I got brain cancer and I'm going to die anyhow, what's the point? John 12 steps me in that big book convention. And he says, kid, you're going to make it. Kid, you're going to make it. You just keep coming back, Billy. You keep coming back, man. And I held on to that. And that kept me sober. I said, if John didn't have to drink and he's dying, maybe I don't have to drink because I want to live. So these were the people that God had placed in my life as a result of sobriety. I haven't had an original thought since I arrived here. My best thinking is the reason I'm sharing with you this afternoon. I got none of the answers. They all came through cats like Tony and those that were here when I arrived. That's why I'm here. Because I owe them all a debt of gratitude. It's not because of you. What you do with your life is your life. It's your personal thing. I'm paying back a debt, man. I owe something to Alcoholics Anonymous. Tony said, Billy, men will go from the east side to the west side of town to speak at a meeting, but they won't walk across the room to shake the hand of a newcomer. I never forgot that. I never enter a room and do not greet everyone in the room before I take my seat. You know, I saw a guy a few months ago sitting in the back of the room. I come in the room, I'm getting ready to shake everybody's hand. And I go and shake this guy's hand. And I walk up on this cat and I said, how you doing, bro? My name is Billy D. He says, you know me. I don't know you. First of all, you look bad. He says, yes, you do. I'm Mike. I'm like, oh my God, no, Mike, what happened, man? I've been drinking. He looked bad, unrecognizable to me. That's what alcohol does. Tony says to me years ago, Tony says, Billy, you can do anything you want to in Alcoholics Anonymous. And I share this with the people that I sponsor. Up to and including taking a drink, if you're willing to pay the consequences. Everything comes with consequences. So I have not found it necessary to pick up a drink. I've had days that I've accepted the unacceptable. I've had days that I had to tell myself that this too shall pass. I had days when I was holding on to the table, and when there were times when the table was holding me up. I was 9 months sober. No, I was still undrunk. I remember. It took me a long time to get sober. In fact, it was Tony that told me when I was 6 months undrunk. He said he was rebuking me, and I'm kind of upset about this, annoyed, you see, because I'm standing 6'2", 240, and Tony is standing like 5'11". He's an Italian from Boston, and he's, you know, what do you know? I said, what do you mean I'm not sober, Tony? He says, Billy, you just undrunk. But here's the caveat. You can't get sober until you get undrunk. And you can't have some recovery until you get sobriety. So it all works, there's a process, there's a way that this works. So I'm undrunk and I'm sitting in the meeting, and a woman comes in that I really don't know that well, but they had heard me crying and complaining and kicking and screaming. And she says, before the meeting starts, Billy, after the meeting, I want to take you for a ride. I'm like, okay, fine, I'll go with you. So she goes after the meeting to a place in Carol knows, it's on University. It was a AAA office. AAA is like Automobile Agency of America, something like insurance kind of stuff. So she walks in the AAA office and she comes out the AAA office and she hands me a ticket. And the ticket is round trip to Detroit, Michigan. and I'm saying, I can say her name because she's gone now. I said, Jean, I can't pay you back for this. I don't have any money, you know. Here's what Jean says to me. She says, Billy, I don't want anything in return. All I ask is that you never tell anyone that I did this. You don't want to blow your horn. You don't want me to blow your horn. She says, I'm paying back a debt that I owed for 16 years ago. All I ask is that you pay it back. You pay it forward. And I've had the opportunity to do that. I've shared that in meetings when Jean was there. Never called her name. Never called her name. And these were the people that were here when I got here, that loved me when I could not love myself. And the spiritual awakening came to me the day I took that ticket and was on my way to Detroit, Michigan. The plane had a layover in Atlanta. And so as we get to Atlanta, and the gate says, well, there's a delay for this flight, you know, but here's what we'll do. We'll let you go to the bar, the lounge next door, and you'll like gratitude or just give you a drink. What a drink is on us. And that sounded pretty attractive. I'm 9 months into sobriety, and then the undrunk comes out, and nobody hears from my home group. Nobody will know that I drank. And by the time I get to Detroit, nobody will know I've been drinking. And then sobriety kicked in and said, are you crazy? Do you really believe you can do one drink? So at the time I was smoking cigarettes, and I lit a cigarette, and I dropped my head down between my legs, and it was just hanging there. And in Atlanta, it was a hub, so people were walking back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And then all of a sudden, I see a set of feet in front of me. So I looked up, and it was a guy standing there, and he asked me, "Can I get a light?" And I said, "Sure." I gave him a light, and we sat down. Come to find out, he's telling me that he worked for Pan Am. Some of you may know that was an airline and it's been gone for a long time. So he said he worked for Pan Am, and because he was an employee, he used to get to fly all over the place for like the taxes on the ticket. And I'm thinking to myself, man, that's a sweet gig. I'm still not gainfully employed. I'm like, how do you get a job like that? So he says, well, you know, you just fill out the application, and then they'll drug test you. So I'm 9 months undrunk. So I'm thinking to myself, I can pass a drug test. This is cool, because I'm sober 9 months. And then this cat tells me he's in the fellowship as well. So, okay, this is really getting better and better. So I asked him, I said, well, I'm on my way to Detroit. He says, I'm going to Detroit too. And he says, when we get to Detroit, why don't we hook up and go to a meeting? I'm like, that sounds wonderful. I'm thanking God, because I was ready to drink that day. And so he gives me his telephone number on a piece of paper. The name was Dexter or David, something like that, something with a D. So he gives me the telephone number on a piece of paper and says, when we get to Detroit this evening, give me a call and we'll hit a meeting. I'm like, excellent, that sounds great. I get to Detroit, I look at the paper, I dial the number, and some woman answers the phone, and I asked for him. And she says, I'm sorry, you have the wrong number. I'm saying, are you sure this is not the right number? He gave it to me. She says, nobody by that name lives here. Having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps, you get one spiritual awakening. The rest are just spiritual moments, experiences. I was awakened in that moment that the God of my understanding, you know, there's a verse in the really big book that says, be careful how you entertain strangers, because many have entertained angels unaware. And it hit me like a ton of bricks. Many have entertained angels unaware. So David, Dexter, whoever he was, that was my angel, man. He came to my rescue. I was going to drink. And that wasn't the first time I felt the craving. They used to come often enough. But here's something else. As I'm an old man now, I say that because that's what my grandkids think I am. Poppy, 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 you know. I've seen my life pass and go by. And I realized when my mother, I had a praying mother, man. She was one of those mothers that was all about praying for her children. And she says, Billy, I'm praying that God will take the taste of alcohol out of your mouth and stop you from smoking them cigarettes. And I would say, oh, Ma, come on. I'm okay. I'm good. I'm good. And I did not realize until just recently that every time I came into the brick wall or the railroad crossing had gone down and the lights were flashing, and I had to pause because I was in another jackpot. I just realized this recently. Mama's been dead for two or 3 years now. God had answered her prayer every one of those occasions, because I knew I was there as a result of drinking, and I couldn't drink at that time, so I had to dry out. I said, well, I'm not going to drink anymore, maybe till the weekend. And when the lights stopped flashing and the bells stopped going, I'd be back off drinking again. And I just realized a couple of weeks ago, God had answered my mother's prayer, but I wasn't ready. He had answered her prayer many, many times. I've been in the jackpot more than I like to talk about, man. I drank far too much, far too often, for far too long. So I was a problem drinker, and I ended up in the jackpot a lot of times. But that was God answering my mother's prayer, and I never realized it. But I realize it now today, because He's done for me what I could not do for myself. I was coming up on 25 years sober, and feeling good, feeling good. Tony had said something in addition to that day after. He said, you keep coming back because it ain't as good as it's going to get. So I'm sitting in a meeting 17 years later. Tony walks in the meeting and he sits down next to me and he says, Billy, how you doing? I said, I'm doing great, Tony. And he says, and it still ain't as good as it's going to get. I'm like, wow, that's pretty cool. So at 24 years, I'm getting ready to celebrate my 25th anniversary in Alcoholics Anonymous. And when I came in 25 years, you were an old timer. And then as I got 17, 18, they said you had to have 30 years to be an old timer. I'm like, what? Why you keep pushing it back? You know, at 24 years, they told me you got to be 35 years to be an old timer. So I've just claimed it, man. I got 33 years. I'm an elder statesman. Call it, say what you got to say. I don't care. Tony told me years ago, he said, Billy, we used to call them down here in Florida pigeons. And people actually took offense to that. These young people took offense to it, so they stopped calling them pigeons and started calling them sponsees. So here's the kicker, though. I asked Tony, I said, Tony, why do you call me a pigeon, bro? He says, Billy, a pigeon carries the message, and he keeps coming back. So I've been a pigeon for 33 years, and the cats that I sponsor, they're my pigeons, and they understand that. And whenever they share the meeting and they talk about being a pigeon, they say, Billy D must be your sponsor. That's right. Ain't no shame in that. Carry the message. Keep coming back. I hear those men and those women who were here when I got here. I'm speaking for them. This is the stuff they told me. So in 25 years sober, I'm thinking to myself, life is good. Life is good. And I get the call in the middle of not even in the middle of the night, it was early that morning, 6:38, because it was on my cell phone, 6:38. And my baby girl calls me in delirious. And at this hour, I'm thinking something's happened to my grandson. So, you know, I have two daughters. My oldest daughter is Peaches, and my youngest daughter is Tweety. Tweety, she liked Tweety Bird. And I said, Peaches, what's wrong? She's screaming, Daddy, Daddy. And I'm like, Peaches, what's wrong? She said, Daddy, Dewan. And she didn't have to say no more. My wife looked at me and she said, "What's going on?" I said, "I think Dewan is dead." And I told her to stay put. I was coming over, and Dewan died. Dewan had passed. He actually had a heart attack on the freeway in Detroit and died in a rollover car accident. Dewan was 39. Look, I have had the saddest day of my life in sobriety. There will never, ever be another day sadder than that day, October 27th, 2014. Nothing can compare to the loss of a child. And I called Tony, and Tony shares with me something that I had shared with him 25 years ago. And I says, in the midst of my pain, he's given me the answer that I had given him. And I say, "Tony, you remember that?" And Tony says to me, "Billy, what do you think? I wasn't listening." That man paid attention to every conversation we ever had. He was listening to all my suffering. He didn't just celebrate the good times. He was with me in the hurt and the pain. "Billy, what do you think? I wasn't listening?" I thank God for Tony. I thank God for him. And men and women like the ones that were in your life, you've had your Tonys. I know this, because you wouldn't be here. It took people like that to care enough to keep coming back and want to give it away like a pigeon to guide and direct some misguided man such as myself. I'm the wretch that they sing about in that song. I blew it. I destroyed a life. But the grace of God, it has been restored. It has been restored. And no matter what you're going through, if you had some sad days, they'll pass. And maybe you have not had the saddest day of your life, but you'll get through it. Because the day that happened, my son is in Detroit laying on a slab in the morgue, and I'm chairing a meeting at the 101 Club, where Carol knows what that's at. I chair that morning's meeting. My wife says, "Do you want me to chair for you?" I said, "No." I heard Tony's voice. "You took a commitment." And I had nowhere else to go anyway. I went and I chaired the meeting. And when I walked in the room, I had on my shades, and everybody was like, "Billy, yo, Billy D, what's going on, man? And how's it going?" I said, "Not so well, not so good today. My son just died." And one guy still tells me, he said, I thought you were kidding, man." I'm like, how sick is this dude to say his son died? So I get to the front of the room and I start chairing the meeting, and the preamble is about to be said. And I'm having a hard time. I'm having a hard time holding it together. Now, the 101 Club has a podium in the front of the room, and it's a large rectangular building, but in the back of the room, which is about 20 yards from where I'm standing, in the back of the room, up jumps Jimmy Mills. I didn't know him the day before, but he will forever be a part of my message. Jimmy Mills jumps up in the back of the room, makes his way between the tables and around the chairs and all the people. He comes to the front of the room and throws his arm around me. And together, we recite the preamble, a fellowship of men and women who share their experience, strength, and hope with each other, that they may solve their common problem and help others to recover from alcoholism. The only requirement for membership is a desire to stop drinking. No dues, no fees for AA membership, self-supporting through our own contributions. He shares that with me. He holds me together when I'm going to pieces. That's Alcoholics Anonymous. We will be here for you no matter what. It's the way I got it. So I give it back. It's no nonsense. Look, you want me to be your sponsor? When you row, I will row. But when you stop rowing, I stop rowing. Don't waste my time. I owe it to the cats that brought me over. I wasn't about wasting nobody's time. Alcohol. Here's what Tony says to me today. He says, "Big shot, you not sober, you just undrunk." Here's something that Tony said. I never forget it, and I've shared it with these other big shots that come through. They say, "You ain't sober." I say, "I am sober. I got about 6 months in the game." He says, "Billy, if you don't like it here, there's the door. Go screw. Who sent for you anyway? AA don't need you, Billy. You need AA." So he brought me back right size. And that's what I tell the cats that I sponsor. We don't need you. You need us. So don't come with me thinking you're sober when you're just undrunk. And who do you think you're talking to? You don't like this meeting? Get a coffee pot. Start your own meeting. How you think this got going anyway? I see names on here from the UK. It all started with a resentment. That's how it got to the UK. Get a coffee pot, start your own meeting. Do whatever you want. Alcoholics Anonymous is there. Come rain, come shine. I had a dear friend, and she's sober a while, and her daughter, her only daughter, died about 3 weeks ago, and she shows up at the meeting. Now I wasn't there that day, but that meeting meets twice a week. So when I got there the following that Friday, they tell me that Nancy's daughter passed, and I'm like, oh, because I know how that feels. You cannot even describe the pain to lose your child, one of the only people in the world that I would have died for. I would have given my life for my boy. God, how could you do this to me? But Nancy showed up at the meeting, and here's what she told everyone. Now, this is 9 years ago when my son passed. She says, "I remember the day that Billy D's boy died. He chaired the meeting. You don't know who's watching you. You can't walk through this fellowship acting like it's all about you. You need to give something back. We need to share our pain. It ain't all about the good times. There's some bad days coming, and if you haven't seen them yet, you will. And trust me, if you ain't got enough meetings under your belt when that day comes, you will drink. I only need 1 meeting a week, but I don't know which one it is. Very simple program. For the prayers of mother, for firm stature of my father. And this only comes as the years have gone by. You know, there's
I think we lost you, Billy. Yep. Yeah, I think we lost.